The greatest lie we've been told about death is that it's the end. What happens in the first moments after the last breath is far from a silent void. There are ancient records, hidden even within initiatic orders, that describe a precise sequence of psychic and spiritual events unfolding over 49 days, a silent journey that few recognize, and even fewer understand. Have you ever wondered why so many ancient cultures insist on this exact number? And why this knowledge was removed from common books, kept only in encrypted manuscripts and high-level rituals? There is a map, but it's not made of roads or landscapes. It's a map of consciousness, a path that passes through repressed memories, emotional fragments, and choices that echo even after death. Modern neuroscience is beginning to touch on points mystics have always claimed. The mind continues, even without the body. The question is, where does it go? And more unsettling, who guides it? In what follows, you'll understand why you've never heard any of this, and how this secret could change everything. They said death is an end, a full stop. But what if it's only a pause between two signals? The heart stops, the lungs fall silent, and yet the brain remains active. Recent studies show that after so-called clinical death, there's a surge of brain activity, as if the mind, even as the body shuts down, tries to scream one last time, or maybe access something that was hidden all along. The question scientists avoid asking is, what exactly is happening at that moment? In Canada, one patient's brain activity was recorded for 10 minutes after death. Brainwaves similar to those seen in deep dream states were detected. But how is that possible if the entire vital system had already stopped? Some spiritualists call this moment the threshold of truth, where the soul can still hear, still feel, still think. It's in this space between the last heartbeat and oblivion that the process many call transition begins. But transition? To where and under what laws? It's in this interval that ancient texts speak of the beginning of ego deprogramming, as if the self, still clinging to the body's memory, resists the loss of control. Consciousness, now without a physical anchor, begins to hear sounds, see shapes, and revisit memories with an unexplainable clarity. This isn't imagination. According to near-death experience reports, perceptions in this state are more real than life itself. Why do so many people see the same images, feel the same light, go through the same tunnel? Science says they are hallucinations, a collapsing brain. But why are these hallucinations so organized, so coherent across different cultures, religions, and ages? Wouldn't it be more logical for everyone to see something completely random? And more importantly, why do these reports always come with a profound sense of clarity and peace, as if the end of the body revealed a new way of existing, a frequency that was hidden beneath the density of matter? According to some esoteric schools, this is when the first portal opens. Not a physical portal, but a shift in frequency. The soul, still resonating in the body's electromagnetic field, begins to slowly detach, yet without losing immediate contact with the surroundings. This would explain the reports of people who saw their own bodies from above, heard conversations around them, knew details they could only have known if they were still present. But if consciousness left the body, why is it still so close? What stops it from moving on? What holds the soul in the first minutes after death? And why is this moment described by initiates as the most dangerous of all? There is something someone doesn't want us to know. And perhaps over the next 49 days, that secret begins to reveal itself. There is a little understood symbol that appears in the most advanced rituals of initiatic orders, a black mirror surrounded by 49 marks. To the uninitiated, it's just another decorative artifact. But to those who reach the 33rd degree of certain esoteric systems, it represents something much deeper, the invisible map of consciousness after death. According to rare records, each mark represents a reflection of the soul, a stage of confrontation with fragments of who we were but also of what we never had the courage to be. Few know this, but the number 33 is associated with the culmination of human experience. Christ died at 33. The spine has 33 vertebrae, as if the elevation of consciousness followed an internal axis. But what happens when that structure dissolves? What remains of consciousness when the body is no longer its home? It is at this point that the secret map begins to reveal itself, not in the external world, but as a holographic projection of the unconscious, showing the soul what it always avoided seeing. Some transpersonal psychologists suggest that the afterlife is an extension of what Jung called the individuation process, the integration of all the parts we repress in life. That would explain why, according to these same rituals, the soul must go through 49 internal reflections. Each one represents an unresolved emotional or psychological aspect. Denied anger, hidden guilt, unlived love, everything left for later, now demands to be faced, without masks. Curiously, when patients under deep hypnosis are guided to life between lives, many report something similar, a place where memories are reviewed, emotions re-experienced, and a kind of counsel, or inner judgment, manifests. But who or what is conducting this process? Could it be the higher self, a greater intelligence, or a universal mechanism regulating consciousness like a magnetic field adjusting frequencies? What traditions don't openly say is that not everyone completes all 49 reflections. Many get stuck in a specific cycle, as if something pulls them back every time they try to move forward. This could explain certain phenomena like spiritual obsession, memories that don't belong to anyone, or even fragmented personalities in living people. The map, then, is more than a guide. It's a test, a kind of soul decoder. But what lies beyond the 49th reflection? Why does the map end there, on the edge of the unknown? And even more unsettling, what is hidden in the reflection that doesn't appear? The 50th mirror no one dares to name. 7 days, 1 week. It seems like something ordinary, almost trivial. But have you ever wondered why time was divided this way? Why not 5 or 10? The answer may lie far from modern logic and closer to an ancient energetic code that regulates not just time, but consciousness itself. Many spiritual texts refer to the 49 days after death as a process, but they don't explain what happens within those days. What few know is that this period is divided into 7 cycles, each with its hidden and perhaps irreversible function. In Tibetan tradition, these cycles are described as phases in which the soul sheds mental layers. It's as if every 7 days, a psychic skin is peeled away. Fears, memories, desires, all are revealed, intensified, and then dissolved. Interestingly, Western psychology also observes emotional changes in 7-day blocks following major traumas. Cellular biology shows that the body begins renewal, cycles in 7-day multiples. Could we be looking at a universal rhythm? An invisible pulse governed by laws that span both flesh and spirit? But what if each of these 7 days is not just a cleansing phase, but a test? A silent rite where consciousness must prove something, maybe to itself? Some say that during each week after death, we're confronted with a choice: forgiveness, detachment, truth, acceptance, feelings we easily ignore in life, but that now become portals. Passing through them may set us free or trap us. But no one tells you how to know if you've passed, because the judge is not outside. It is part of what you've always been. Quantum physics studies how patterns repeat on different scales: fractals, rhythms, waves. Consciousness, according to some theorists, works like a vibration that adapts to its environment. What if, during these 49 days, the soul is seeking a frequency compatible with its true state? Not what it wanted to be, but what it is, without illusions, without masks, without a body. That frequency, then, would guide it to its next reality. But what happens to those who can't find resonance? Some texts call this state vibrational repetition, like a scratched record. The soul tries to move on, but gets pulled back to the same point. An emotional cycle that repeats not just during these days, but in other lives. As if time, in this state, is not linear, but circular. A maze built from the same thoughts we nurtured in life. 7 days to recognize, 7 to transform, 7 to be free. But what happens in the final cycle, the 7th set of 7 days? Is that when everything is decided? Or is it precisely at that moment that another, even more, hidden countdown begins? A countdown we were never taught? Imagine waking up and not knowing who you are. No name, no face, no past. This is the first impact described by those who cross the threshold of conscious death. There are no more documents, professions, gender, or social identity. The self, we know, begins to dissolve like mist before the sun. But what remains when there is no more identity? What is revealed behind the personality we wore all our lives like a comfortable, yet borrowed, outfit? Neuroscience shows us that our sense of identity is anchored in specific areas of the brain. The prefrontal cortex, for example, is responsible for constructing the I. But if that brain goes silent, what happens to this character we defended so fiercely? And even more, if consciousness continues, but the physical structure that supported identity disappears, who is there observing? What does that remaining presence feel, think, or remember after the veil has fallen? Reports of expanded states of consciousness, whether through deep meditation, near-death experiences, or the use of visionary substances, all point to the same phenomenon. The dissolution of identity does not bring fear, but an almost inexplicable relief. It's as if the soul, freed from the prison of the I, experiences for the first time what it truly is. Jung called this the encounter with the self, the totality of being, beyond the persona, the roles, and the stories we tell about ourselves. But the question remains, why so much effort to build an ego if, in the end, it will be undone? Perhaps because the ego functions as a bridge, not the final destination, but the means to cross the physical life. A necessary disguise to survive in the material world. However, upon death, that bridge collapses, and whatever wasn't recognized as true falls with it. Only the essential remains. But who defines what is essential, what truly belongs to us, and what was merely a conditioned reflection? Ancient Egyptian teachings spoke of the weight of the heart, placed on a scale against the feather of truth. It wasn't the body being judged, but what it emotionally carried: lightness, authenticity, the absence of masks. Perhaps this is what the early days after death reveal so clearly, that everything we pretended to be does not survive, and the soul, faced with the first torn veil, sees itself as it truly is, for the first time, without filters. But what happens to those who refuse to accept what they see? Who resists the dissolution of their own image? Is there a force that pulls us back, or a mirror that splits in half when we refuse to face who we truly are? There's a strange pattern that doctors and caregivers have noticed in terminal patients. In the hours or days before death, many report vivid, lucid, and symbolic dreams. They see celestial landscapes, reunite with deceased loved ones, or walk through places they've never seen before. Science still hesitates to clearly explain this, but close observers notice something beyond delirium. Could this be the beginning of a crossing, announced in the backstage of sleep? Studies with DMT, a natural psychedelic substance present in the human body, show that it can be released in large quantities during moments of birth and also death. This substance has the power to create experiences very similar to vivid dreams, full of symbols, beings, and parallel realities. But why would the brain activate such precise and universal imagery at that moment? Why, instead of nothingness, do we see a world that feels more real than our own? The explanation may lie in something spiritual traditions have known for millennia: the dream as training, a silent rehearsal for death. Tibetans practice lucid dreaming as a preparation tool for the bardo, the intermediate state between one life and another. In many indigenous cultures, dreaming of certain symbols is considered a clear sign that the soul is about to leave the body. But who are the architects of these dreams? Is the soul accessing a pre-existing dimension or merely reconstructing fragmented memories? When we look at the brain in REM sleep, the deepest dream state, we see increased activity in areas linked to emotion and memory, exactly the same areas activated during near-death experiences. It's as if the dying process necessarily involves one final visit to the deepest emotional records. Not as a farewell, but as a silent review of everything that cannot be carried forward. What isn't resolved there returns. And then a pattern begins to emerge, a tunnel of light, an open field, a being that awaits, elements that, interestingly, also appear in recurring dreams of people still alive. Could consciousness be receiving preludes of death long before the final moment? And what if dreams are more than mental discharges? What if they're memories of a place we always return to, even without realizing it? But what happens to those who don't dream or refuse to remember? Could they be blocking not only memories, but the very call that comes before the end? Shortly after the vital signs shut down, there is a moment described by many traditions as the most terrifying, and at the same time, the most liberating. It's not the meeting with the light nor the crossing of the tunnel. It's the instant when the soul sees itself, not with the eyes of the body, but with a direct, raw, filterless perception. What it sees is not a face, but a living reflection of everything generated by each choice, thought, and feeling that shaped its existence. And what happens in that instant changes everything. Carl Jung said the unconscious is like a shadow behind the mirror, and that we only see its face when the mirror breaks. But in death, that mirror doesn't just break, it turns. What was once behind, hidden, moves to the center. The shadow takes form, not as punishment, but as revelation. No one points out our mistakes. We see them ourselves, relive them, feel them. The pain we caused, the love we denied, the opportunities we wasted out of fear. Everything becomes present, as if it had never passed. This phenomenon also appears in reports of near-death experiences when people describe a life review that is not just visual, but emotional. They say they don't just see what they did. They feel what the other person felt because of their actions. It's as if the soul gains multiple points of view, absorbing all the impacts of its journey through the world. Science still can't explain how the brain could generate such a complex experience in a matter of milliseconds. Maybe because it's no longer the brain operating. Some call this moment the judgment of the mirror. But contrary to what the word suggests, there is no external judge, no sentence. There is only truth, naked, silent, inevitable, and it has the exact weight of everything we refuse to face in life. Ignored emotions, unhealed traumas, masks we glued on so tightly they forgot to fall. And now, they're all there, motionless, alive, staring back. But why does this happen? What is the purpose of seeing ourselves so exposed? Some traditions believe this is the only path to true freedom, to recognize oneself completely. Not just what is shown to the world, but everything that was hidden. This recognition, they say, defines the next step. Those who accept what they see it move forward. Those who deny it remain. But remain where? And for how long? What happens to those who can't bear what they see? Is it possible to break that mirror? Or does it follow us even when we turn our face away? Imagine carrying a suitcase no one can see, filled with fears you never spoke aloud, resentments you chose to forget, and pains you never knew how to name. Now imagine that, upon death, that suitcase doesn't disappear. On the contrary, it opens. During the 49 days following death, ancient traditions say the soul is confronted with everything it never felt, not as a memory, but as a living presence. Stored emotions take shape, and sometimes they scream. Psychology has already shown us that repressed emotions don't disappear. They hide in the body, in behavior, in silence. But when the body is gone, where do those emotions go? Some studies on patients who suffered extreme trauma suggest that certain emotional states remain active in the unconscious for years, shaping dreams, decisions, even illnesses. If that happens in life, why would it be different in death? What we hold in holds us. In Eastern spiritual traditions, there is talk of kleshas, mental impurities that accumulate like dust on the soul. Guilt, envy, anger, attachment, each with its own density, its own vibration. According to these doctrines, after death, these impurities take form and surround consciousness like conscious shadows. They are not external demons, they are internal creations, and they must be faced one by one before one can move on. But how do you defeat what built you from the inside? Accounts from those who've had near-death experiences reveal intense moments of emotional confrontation. People say they relived painful situations, but in an amplified way, feeling everything with multiplied intensity. There are no distractions in that state. Nothing to soften the impact. That's why many describe this process as more difficult than physical death itself. It's not the body that hurts, it's the soul. And the pain doesn't come from outside, but from within. As if every unfelt emotion now demands its place. Modern physics is beginning to admit that emotions are not just chemical reactions, but energy fields, vibrations, condensed information. If that's true, death doesn't eliminate these charges. It only releases them. And what do we do with them once they're set free? How can we process in just a few days what we spent a lifetime avoiding? Maybe that's why this period is so decisive. It's not a time of judgment, it's a time of emotional digestion. But what happens to those who can't digest? Where do the emotions go when they continue to weigh us down, even without a body? To feel them? The body dies, but the senses don't cease immediately. There are astonishing reports of people who were declared clinically dead and upon returning described smells, voices, touches, and even tastes with disconcerting clarity. How can we explain such intense perception without a functional body? What exactly is doing the perceiving? Science hesitates to answer, but some spiritual traditions claim there is a subtle body that remains connected for a while. A body that feels, suffers, and remembers. In ancient Egyptian culture, this body was called the Ka, a kind of energetic duplicate that maintained the shape of the physical body, but vibrated at another frequency. This concept is not isolated. In various spiritual traditions, from Hinduism to Spiritism, there is talk of an etheric double, a layer of consciousness that remains near material reality for days or weeks after death. It is through this layer that the senses continue to operate, not for physical pleasure or pain, but as part of a deeper process, the sensory recognition of farewell. Imagine being able to hear the conversations around you, smell the scent of your home, recognize your favorite song playing in the background, and no longer be able to interact. This could explain why so many reports of spiritual presence at funerals or in the days following death speak of sensory manifestations. Perfumes, whispers, changes in temperature. Consciousness, still connected, seeks to understand what has happened. And maybe to say goodbye to a body it still believes to be its own. But it's not just external senses that persist. Internal sensations remain too. Some mediums describe Entities that report feelings of hunger, thirst, cold, or intense emotional pain, not because the body exists, but because sensory memory is still alive. This raises an unsettling question. Could the habits and attachments of the physical body remain active after death, influencing the soul's state? The desire for addictions, for food, for touch? Could they be invisible chains keeping the spirit anchored to material density? Neuroscience has already identified that sensory memories are among the hardest to erase. They're linked to the limbic system, the most primitive part of the brain. If these memories remain even in comatose states or severe degenerations, it wouldn't be so absurd to imagine that they resist clinical death. But what happens to this sensory charge after death? Does it dissipate or crystallize? And if the subtle body continues to feel, to what extent can this imprison consciousness? And more importantly, could there be sensations that never belong to the body, but always to the soul? During the first days after death, the soul does not plunge into absolute silence. On the contrary, according to records from ancestral traditions, it comes into contact with images, sounds, and symbolic patterns of staggering clarity. But they are not random. They appear as precise signs, like markers on a map that only reveals itself when the physical eyes close. Tibetan monks train their entire lives to recognize them, and they affirm, those who don't understand the symbols get lost. The language of the afterlife is not made of words. It manifests through archetypes, universal images that speak directly to the soul. A bridge breaking, a river that can't be crossed, an animal blocking the path. These scenes, seemingly simple, carry deep messages. They are the spiritual equivalent of instructions. But why would the universe speak in images? Carl Jung believed that the collective unconscious communicates in exactly this way. And what if, after death, we enter directly into that unconscious, now as protagonists? The most curious thing is that these images also appear in altered states of consciousness, deep meditations, lucid dreams, shamanic rituals. There's a pattern, a repetition of symbols that transcends cultures, religions, and geographies. Could this be a coincidence? Or do these states access the same frequency as post-death consciousness? And why do these symbols seem to carry their own intelligence? Many say they feel these symbols are not created by the mind, but revealed to it, as if they've always been there. Modern science has begun to study how visual patterns, mandalas, fractals, sacred geometries, affect the brain. And the results are surprising. They activate areas linked to calm, intuition, and heightened perception. These symbols are not just images, they are triggers. And what if, after death, the soul encounters these same triggers, but now without distractions, without filters, without resistance? Maybe they are keys, portals, and understanding what they mean could be the difference between ascending or getting lost in cycles of confusion. In occult texts, there is talk of the importance of recognizing the signs of the path. But what happens to those who don't know what they're seeing? Who misinterpret the symbol or ignore its presence? It's like trying to cross an unfamiliar city without reading the signs. You walk, you tire, but you get nowhere. Maybe that's why so many reports of lost spirits speak of repetition. The same places, the same scenes, the same faces. Could they be trying to decipher something they can't understand? But who created these symbols? Who chose these images? As a universal language? And why does their true meaning always seem to slip away as if it can only be understood from the other side? And what if, upon dying, you woke up inside your own mind? No body, no time, no external setting, just thoughts, memories, and emotions unfolding in sequence, like rooms opening one into another. Some esoteric traditions say that the afterlife is less a journey outward and more an absolute immersion into the subconscious. Everything that was repressed, hidden or dormant, during life now becomes visible, inescapable, immense. Freud said the subconscious was a repository of repressed impulses and desires. Jung went further. He claimed it is the bridge between the ego and the self, the field where the archetypes that shape who we are reside. But what happens when that field becomes the only space available? Without a body to censor, without daily life to distract, the mind begins to inhabit itself. And what it finds there is not always light. Often, they are labyrinths, built by ourselves. There are fascinating accounts of people who, after near-death experiences, said they lived in mental worlds where everything responded to thought. Just by thinking of something, it would appear, but not as fantasy, as vivid reality. And it was in that moment that many realized they were trapped in their own fears, desires, and memories. The mind, freed from the body, creates the environment. But if the mind is chaotic, confused, fragmented, what does it build? And more importantly, how do you escape a place that responds to everything you feel, even unintentionally? Neuroscience suggests that thoughts have real power. They shape the brain, create electrical patterns, form habits. If that's true in life, why would it be any different after death? Maybe the subconscious is, in fact, the first world we inhabit when the physical dissolves. And if that's the case, every unresolved trauma, every silent obsession, every fixed idea becomes a scenario. A prison made of psychic matter, with doors that only open when the key is emotional. But these doors don't open on their own. According to certain spiritual currents, it's necessary to recognize and accept the origin of suffering in order to dissolve it. Otherwise, it repeats, in cycles, in spirals, in echoes that do not stop. Some souls, the ancients say, spend eons trapped in these states, seeing the same images, feeling the same voids, trying to escape without realizing that the only way out is in. Is this the real hell? Not a place, but a mental pattern that repeats until something finally awakens? But what, after all, triggers that awakening? Is there a sound, a memory, a word that can open those doors from the inside out? In 1907, Dr. Duncan McDougall performed a strange, almost macabre experiment. He weighed patients at the exact moment of death. The results, still controversial today, showed a sudden loss of 21 grams. McDougall believed he had measured the weight of the soul. He was ridiculed by many, but the question he dared to ask still echoes. If the soul truly exists, does it have mass? Does it occupy space? Or does it vibrate in another kind of reality, where weight and time obey different rules? Modern physics admits there are particles that appear and disappear in the quantum vacuum. That there is dark matter, invisible, which makes up about 85% of the universe, and which we can't see or weigh. But we feel its effects. So why would it be absurd to imagine that consciousness also has an invisible, subtle, but real structure? A form of energy that survives the body, detaches from it, and follows another kind of path, obeying laws that science hasn't even named yet? In Hermetic traditions, there is talk of the body of light, a subtle form built throughout life, layer by layer, with every thought, emotion, and intention. A body that does not die with the physical one, but that must be strengthened in order to survive in what they call the higher planes. And if this construction is real, it would have a vibration, an energetic density, perhaps even a mass. Something that cannot be measured by scales, but that manifests as presence. Reports from mediums and out-of-body experiences often describe this presence as dense yet translucent. There are also cases of people who, upon temporarily leaving the body, feel a pull, a resistance, as if something is trying to remain anchored. The soul, then, would not be a ghostly gas, but an organized form of energy. And like all energy, it carries information, identity, a journey, and maybe even gravity. The idea that the soul might have mass leads us to another, even more unsettling question. If it has density, then it may also carry emotional weight, accumulated burdens, attachments, traumas. And maybe that explains why some consciousnesses seem to rise lightly, while others remain stuck in an intermediate plane. Not because of punishment, but because of density. What has not been resolved weighs you down. But what would happen if we discovered that this invisible mass can be changed? That in life, we have the power to make it lighter or heavier? And the most disturbing of all, what exactly are those 21 grams? And why has the scientific world avoided continuing this research for over a century? Nearly all spiritual traditions report the presence of mysterious figures in the first moments after death, called guides, angels, messengers, or in some cases, guardians. They appear as beings of light, or as threatening forms that seem to block the passage. But who are they? Are they truly there? Or are they reflections of what the soul itself projects while crossing the threshold? The answer, to this day, divides mystics, mediums, and scholars of the mind. In near-death experiences, many people report encounters with entities that know everything about their lives. They describe voices that speak directly to the consciousness, without sound, images that look back, and sensations of judgment or of welcome that don't seem to come from the environment, but from a living, intelligent presence. Depth psychology suggests that these figures may be archetypes, manifestations of the collective unconscious triggered by extreme transitional states. But what does that say about the reality of these beings? Jung spoke of the wise old man and the Great Mother as universal patterns that emerge in critical moments. Could these guardians be representations of these inner forces? Or are they real entities operating at a frequency beyond our usual perception? The fact that cultures separated by centuries and oceans report similar figures suggests there is more than imagination at play. Something that may not be physical, but is also not just symbolic. Some shamans claim that upon death, the soul must negotiate its passage, and that these guardians are vibrational filters. They don't ask what you believe, but what you resonate. Your fear, your hatred, your guilt, all of it manifests before them as form, as color, as density. There are no disguises, and if your frequency isn't compatible with the next level, you don't pass. Not because you were condemned, but because there is no resonance. You simply can't cross over. But there are also reports of guardians who are guides, who accompany, guide, instruct. And this raises another hypothesis. What if these beings are not external entities, but elevated parts of the soul itself, fragments of the higher self, which only manifest once we leave the density of matter? If so, the gatekeepers of the threshold would actually be conscious mirrors, revealing what we have yet to know about ourselves. But what happens to those who encounter the guardian and fail to recognize them? Or worse, what happens when the guardian is the very shadow we've denied our entire lives? At the end of the 49 days, something shifts. A subtle, almost imperceptible line is crossed. For some, it's the moment of return. For others, dissolution. But what exactly is being chosen? And more importantly, who is making that choice? Eastern traditions say that at the end of this cycle, consciousness decides whether to reincarnate or to merge with a higher plane of existence. But is it truly a conscious decision, or merely the natural reflection of the vibration the soul cultivated in life? In physics, there is a concept called resonance. Systems that vibrate at the same frequency tend to attract each other. Perhaps the choice is not made through words or rational will, but through the very frequency of being. Those who resonate with anger, attachment, or fear connect with planes compatible with those states. Those who vibrate in peace, truth, and clarity access more subtle levels. Reincarnation, then, would not be a punishment or a reward, but simply an automatic return to that which draws us in. Interestingly, reports from memory regression and deep hypnosis point to the same pattern. People remember a place where they were invited to choose, but they didn't feel fully free. There was a force, an inclination, as if something inside them already knew what the next step would be. And this raises a disturbing question. Are we truly choosing, or merely being carried by the internal currents we created without realizing it? Some Kabbalistic texts suggest that the soul can only truly choose once it reaches a state of complete neutrality, neither desire nor aversion. A point of absolute silence where everything balances. From there, true freedom arises, to return, to learn more, or to dissolve into universal consciousness. But that dissolution is not disappearance, it is expansion. It is to cease being a point and become the whole. The individual self dissolves, but the being continues. Not as someone, but as presence. But what about those still attached to stories, to emotional bonds, unfulfilled dreams, unhealed wounds? These souls, the ancients say, feel an almost inevitable urge to return. They reincarnate not by choice, but by emotional necessity, because something within still cries out for resolution. And maybe, through that movement, consciousness begins to shape itself once again. New experiences, new bodies, new possibilities. And the same dilemmas, spinning in a cycle that never ends. But what if, for some reason, the soul refuses to return, and also cannot dissolve? What happens to those stuck between the two options, trapped at the edge of choice? Not everything dies with the body. There are memories that resist time, matter, even death itself. Memories that don't fade, not because they were well lived, but because they were poorly digested. And that is why so many traditions speak of souls that remain stuck, not out of malice or punishment, but because they are still connected to unfinished stories, as if fragments of the past continue to reverberate, even after the final breath. Modern science still doesn't fully understand where and how memories are stored. We know they're not confined to isolated brain regions. Some seem to spread like a network, connecting emotions and sensations in a pattern that's hard to break. And what if that pattern persists beyond death? Like a field of information that remains active, seeking resolution? This would explain why so many consciousnesses described by mediums speak more of unresolved feelings than of objective facts. In the records of serious mediumship, there's an intriguing pattern. Consciousnesses that return not to make grand revelations, but to ask for forgiveness, to say thank you, to express what was never said. Are these the final lines of a story the ego couldn't write in life? And if the soul can only move on after acknowledging what it ignored? If death doesn't erase, then it only amplifies? Jungian. Psychology suggests that repressed memories have a compulsive tendency to repeat, not because of fate's cruelty, but because what isn't integrated returns in another form. If this is true in the world of the living, why would it be different after death? Maybe that's why some souls reincarnate with inexplicable phobias, immediate bonds with people, or memories that seem to come from nowhere. Echoes, traces, fragments of stories still asking for closure. But there is also another side. Memories so strong, so charged with emotion, that they continue to influence environments, people, even entire families. This is what some traditions call residual impressions, as if pieces of the soul continue vibrating in certain places, objects, or connections. And what if, in some way, we're living with these memories every day, without knowing it? But what happens when these memories accumulate too much? When the invisible legacy becomes so dense that it traps the soul and the living in a cycle no one knows how to break? In some Tibetan traditions, there is a teaching as old as time itself. The sound you hear at the moment of death shapes the frequency of your consciousness. It's not just any sound, it's a vibration, a calling, an energetic seal that acts like a compass. That's why monks train for years to chant the Fawa, the song that guides the soul. The question is, why would sound hold so much power in that final moment? And even more, what is that sound that can mark the destiny of a soul? Modern physics has already shown that sound is not just an auditory phenomenon. It is vibration that organizes matter. Experiments with sound waves and particles reveal perfect geometric patterns, shapes that emerge when sound meets resistance. And what if sound also organized the matter of the soul? What if, in the final seconds, the vibration that resonates around or within us created the structure of the next state of existence? Not as judgment, but as resonance. There are reports of people who died while hearing specific music and came back saying they had crossed through portals with similar sounds echoing in other dimensions. Others speak of absolute silence, so deep it seemed to contain all answers and all secrets at once. Some heard their own name, others the cry of a child. Could the last sound be a symbolic key? A password for the soul to recognize its own path? In ancient Egypt, the Book of the Dead instructed the deceased to speak words of power aloud, even without a body. Sound, they believed, was the most powerful tool for crossing the veils. In Hinduism, the primordial sound Aum represents the source of all, the original vibration of the universe. If creation began with a sound, why wouldn't the transition between worlds also begin, or end, with another? But there's an unsettling detail. What if the last sound we hear isn't chosen, but inherited? What if it's the sum of the inner voices we cultivated in silence throughout our entire lives? The words we said to ourselves, the promises we broke, the screams we held in. All of it may become an internal vibration, one that follows us to the end and beyond. And what if the real danger isn't in the sound, but in the echo, that which keeps reverberating even after everything seems to be over?